President. Well, I actually was going to start this by urging the Greens to try and reconsider their position because, this is a references inquiry. That all it is asking for an inquiry to be held. It's not asking. I mean, a Royal Commission is just insane, but we're just asking for an inquiry. And I mean, if there was any need that any demonstration that reiterated these government's just blatant incompetence is the fact, Senator McKim, that you just had to point out to them that they were just about to lose a vote as they were trying to shut down this debate. I mean, they can't even get the process right, and we're going to be embarrassed there. And I just, the last couple of minutes of Senator McKim's speech there, standing up for, standing up for, standing up for. How about you stand up for good government? How do you stand up against the incompetence that we're seeing by those opposite? Maybe once in a while the Greens might want to stand up for Australians. I mean, they seem more concerned about everybody else's rights than accept people who are actual Australians in the community, which is the one role the government has. Government has one role, and that is to keep Australians safe. But for some reason or another, the Greens are more determined to stand up for everyone other than an Australian, because Australians apparently have no rights to be safe and protected from people who've committed serious crimes and have actually, in many, many cases, find themselves almost stateless because their own countries won't take them back because they're convicted child sex offenders or murderers, or they're convicted in their own countries and face a death penalty. So it's an absolute, absolutely pointless even trying to discuss something rational and sensible with those in the Greens. But it's interesting that we note that those opposite are very upset because the Greens voted with the coalition in the House of Reps, and perhaps I can suggest some marriage counselling there, because we know the Greens and Labor are in a very cosy relationship. We know that they rely on each other 90% of the time and back each other at every opportunity. And in fact, it's the Greens that help 9 times out of 10 this government to hide from the Australian Senate allowing any transparency, whether it's the transmission lines or now this complete debacle around detention. We know it's the Greens that will run the protection racket for the ALP when it comes to transparency. So perhaps some marriage counselling is on the cards for this little partnership. But, it's like a little game of ping-pong at the moment, because we've got from one side, got from the government, and we hear from Minister O'Neill that Mr Dutton, the opposition leader, is soft on borders. He's weak on this issue. Right. I mean, it is the most ridiculous deflection I've ever heard, and there isn't one Australian who believes that. And it's complete, stark contrast to I think it was actually only last week that the Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, was out saying that after Christmas he was expecting Mr Dutton to come back with a new, softer persona as he prepared to embark upon the campaign as the alternate Prime Minister to this country. That Mr Albanese was saying that the hard-headed Mr Dutton, known for his tough stance on borders, his tough stance in home affairs and immigration, the fact that he was part of the Operation Sovereign Borders team, that he was going to need to somehow soften that. But I think what's actually being demonstrated is that Australians are looking for strength. They are looking for leadership, and they know from those opposite that it is absolutely wanting. But it's also very apparent, and you can almost read the playbook. It's like the Morrison election coming over all over again. It's all personal attacks and smears, because they can't stand on their own record because it's an absolute disaster. I mean, let's just go through the broken promises and failed ideas, the wasted $450 million on The Voice, the $275 reduction in power bills that shall never rear its name. I mean, we've got Minister Bowen, the Casanova of the Parliament, who's, this is the old pink bats minister. He was Mr Pink Bats, and now somehow or other Casanova Bowen's in charge of the greatest transformation of our energy grid. I mean, it is just inconceivable that this guy still holds a portfolio. And perhaps, in good news for some of those backbench senators on the Labor side at the moment, when this expected reshuffle comes, some of those barnacles that need to be shifted off, Mr Bowen may find himself one of those. So perhaps those in the Labor right in New South Wales should start positioning, because we know that the replacement won't be made on merit. It'll be made on factional alliance and where the state they're from. So we know Labor right in New South Wales, it could be a vacancy when Casanova gets the see you later. But, you know, it's these personal attacks that we keep seeing, that this is clearly what this government is going to use as a basis for their entire campaign. But it reminds me, you know, there was, although when I was growing up, you know, people used to talk about when the boys were mean to you in the playground, it was actually because they had a bit of a crush on you. Oh, yeah. They were actually a bit keen on you, and that's why they used to say, like, sort of nasty stuff to deflect, to detract from the fact that they actually were a bit keen on you. And so, you know, I mean, Pete must be having a bit of a blush there in his office. Clearly those opposite and those up the end, they've all got a bit of a click on for the Mr Dutts, because they are obsessed with him, absolutely obsessed. I mean, it could get to a stage where I think Mr Dutton might need an AVO over the great deals of affection that are clearly coming in a misguided way from those opposite. I mean, it is just absolutely insane. But if the government thinks that the Australian people, when they are looking down the barrel of a breach of this, even the way they have breached the Australian community's trust with this mishandling of this detention saga, the fact that they've broken all the promises that they made before the election, the fact that as they try and dismantle quietly behind the scenes Operation Sovereign Borders, the boat has arrived with people from I think it was Bangladesh. I heard this morning Bangladeshis arrived paying $12,000 per person to people smugglers to drop them in a remote area of Western Australia. And I mean, we know that, yes, whilst this boat's been discovered, it's probably not the first, and I'm guessing probably not the last. Now that business for people smugglers is open again. But the other thing that does concern me, and this is very serious, what concerns me about the government's shambolic handling of this High Court ruling was, you know, we know, as Senator Patterson said, that the plaintiff NZYQ, when the court found in his favour, Minister Watt came in and told us that no one was going to be released until the reasons came down. They were a government that didn't do anything until the reasons were out. Well, that lasted about 24 hours before Minister Watt had to come in and go, well, oops, we've actually released, I think it was about 48 at that stage. We're now up to 141 individuals who've been released and putting Australian communities at risk. But what I found really interesting, having a look at the reasons from the High Court as it's come down, is the High Court's reasons are actually very narrow. They're very, very narrow indeed. And they relate to NZYQ and the challenges around this person was because he was a convicted child sex offender. And the High Court recognised that Australia had never previously been able to resettle a child sex offender to a third country. It has just never happened. And so the fact that there was no prospects of removal or resettlement, that detention therefore became unlawful. Now, there's two questions here. The first one is, have the 140 people that have been released in the community, are they all child sex offenders? Is that the issue, that those 140 are all child sex offenders with no prospect of being resettled in a third country? And if they're not all child sex offenders, this ruling, in certainly a number of people in my reading of it, and you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I certainly know some very good lawyers, and in their reading of it, it doesn't seem that it actually applies to everybody else. It actually applies very narrowly to NZYQ in the fact he was a convicted child sex offender and there had never been a successful case of resettlement. So there is a very high possibility, and this will continue to be worked through, that the absolutely hapless Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill have potentially released 140 dangerous criminals into the Australian community, 4 of whom aren't wearing electronic monitors. One was missing and thankfully found today. But they may have not needed to have been released. But in almost a premature move, They have released these people without waiting for the reasons, with 140 detainees out in the community after being convicted of serious crimes, putting the Australian community at risk. And I mean, we only heard in question time today, in the most pious of ways, from Minister Wong that we don't discuss AFP. We don't discuss AFP actions and operations that are being undertaken. We don't talk about them. We don't acknowledge them. We don't breathe a word. But the second that the detainee that was missing was located, and we hear late this afternoon that's what's happened, which is a very good thing. But now we hear that the Prime Minister's office is busily briefing every single news agency that will take their call. Because in 2:15 this afternoon, we didn't talk about AFP operations, but by about 5 o'clock, we can't wait to talk about them. Hey guys, AFP operation over here went really well. Look at us, got him back. Yeah, it's funny how those things change. And I mean, it's this lack of consistency. I mean, we know you're complete hypocrites. We know that those sit opposite. If you said it was white, they'd say it was black, and then they come in the next day and go, we know we said it was black, but it's black and it's black, but, we've always said it was white. Because the hypocrisy is just consistent and blatant. I mean, they may have taken a lesson from their marriage partners up in the far left, but, this is just an extraordinary government who is so unprepared to deal with anything. I mean, a basic risk management assessment. I mean, we know no one over there, well, except for Senator Chisholm, who we learnt actually did have a job in a corporate business. But aside from Senator Chisholm, I don't think anyone's actually worked in a company before, particularly a big company. But when you work in many, many companies, they have, and even smaller businesses, to be fair, have what they usually have pretty thorough risk management plans. They have a look at their business. What's going to be a risk to us? What's going to happen? We learnt with the Optus outage. What's a risk to us? Do we need to have a second eSIM in our phone? Do we need to have some roaming capabilities? Because we need to have a backup plan. You work through risk management strategies. Now, we have an Attorney General's department, we have a Home Affairs department, we have an Immigration department. Didn't one of them, someone, anyone, anywhere, Beulah, in those departments say, you know what, we should have a bit of a risk management strategy here, because we now know also, exposed yesterday under Freedom of Information, that Minister O'Neill's office was making certain inquiries and certain concessions that they didn't think the case was going real well. But did anyone say, did the Attorney General say, hey guys, risk management, let's have a look at this. If it ain't going so well, what have we got to do if it doesn't go our way? What happens if the High Court says, guys, not real kosher, going to have to do something about it? What was their risk management plan? Yeah, I can hear the crickets from here. No risk management plan. I mean, anyone will tell you, if you are a competent government, someone, anyone, please have some legislation ready to go. Ready to go. The day that the High Court finds against you, you are ready to go. But no, from those opposite, 1 week and 1 day. And guess what happened when there was finally legislation? It came to the opposition. But 7:15 in the morning, I know we all got together at 8:40 in the morning. Parliament started at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the reason we were all here late that night was because by the time the opposition had a look at that, they could see so many holes in it that they put forward 6 amendments, of which Minister O'Neill had come out that morning saying that never tougher legislation had been drafted, but oops, Minister O'Neill says, oops, but thank you, Mr Dutton, for the 6 amendments, that we're going to take every single one of them because ours was nowhere near strong enough. So the toughest legislation ever written required the opposition to fix it up. And we were here late because you couldn't get your drafting done. And you know why we don't have a bill now? You know why they won't commit to us saying Friday, Saturday, Sunday? We don't have a bill. They have nothing drafted. We hear from Minister O'Neill it's going to be so tough, and Mr Dutton went against it, and we're doing preventative. No, you're not. There's no bill. It's not written. You guys are an absolute joke. Australians can see you're a joke. You're weak on national security. You're weak on border control. You can't understand how the law works, and you certainly don't know how to contribute to it.